Now, as for the cons, the tech can be confusing. Specifically, I think, with the number of modes of communication. Initially, I thought, okay, we need to focus on the planner, and that will tell us what we're supposed to do. But on the planner, they'll have the lessons listed, and they will add modification notes. So instead of actually going in and updating the lesson with the new procedure for completing that assignment, they add a modification note, which takes you somewhere else to a little pop-up window that tells you how the lesson has been changed. I don't see why they don't just update the lesson. So you're constantly looking out for modification notes. And then they'll say, well, look at the message board. So then you also have to go and look at the message board. And then there's the newsletter and the emails. And it's just, it becomes really, really ridiculous, to be perfectly honest. Of all of those different things, you're supposed to somehow figure out what you're doing for that, particular lesson or portfolio. We are familiar enough with it now, more than halfway through the school year, that we roll with it, but they could definitely make that more efficient. The other thing I don't like is that they take the corporate approach to education. When I looked at an online school, I thought, wow, what great potential. They don't have the overhead cost of maintaining a building and paying for AC and paying for insurance and paying for all these different things that a brick and mortar school pays for. So they can take a teacher, feasibly pay that teacher more, and give that teacher fewer students because their overhead is lower. But what they've done is they've taken 70 students and stuck them with 2 teachers. And the way that looks is you have a live lesson going, and one teacher is actually leading the discussion, and another teacher is looking at the feed from all the students so that they can catch any questions or anything like that. But you're still talking about looking at feed from like 70 students. It's a corporate model for approaching education. Every single one of those students is getting the same amount of state funding and potentially federal funding that a student in a brick and mortar school does. At our school here locally, we have about 18 to 21 students per teacher. But on Connexus, using 2 teachers in a live chat room, you have 30 students per teacher. So instead of actually cutting the number of students, they've increased it by 10 students. So that's probably one of the things that I'm most upset about as far as the online school and how it's being run, is that just kind of corporate greed model. As far as grades, the one con that I would say is that they don't have as much padding in an online school. In a public school, they can hand out worksheets and they can hand out a whole bunch of different things, and it's so easy for the student to just do it in class and turn it in, and they get 5 points or 10 points, and so that creates padding in a student's grade. Whereas in the online school, they have quizzes and tests and portfolios, and that's it. And so there's not a whole lot. If you do poorly on a portfolio, you could see your grade drop a full letter grade. That has happened more times than I can count. And it's frustrating because there is very little padding. On the upside though, that means that if you're doing poorly, you can bring your grade back up. It's a really dramatic change. I like the padding that you have in a public school as far as grades and participation. Another con, it can be hard to know where to focus your studying. Do you focus on the electronic lesson? Do you focus on the material that's in the live lesson? And a lot of times they coincide. Or do you focus on the material that's in the book? It's hard to know where to really focus what you're studying on. There aren't study guides that are given out the majority of the time until the student gets a little bit older. Like my 6th grader had a couple of study guides. I haven't really seen my 5th grader with any study guides. And it seems like there's slightly less review that is specific to the test. When you're submitting an assignment, generally you're going to want it to be in a Word format or a PDF. That's pretty consistent. You also turn in different portfolio projects where you have a video or an MP3, something like that. Getting those formatted to the right size can be frustrating with a video. And with one assignment, we turned it in as a PDF instead of turning it in as a Word doc, and got a 0 because it was the wrong format, which that can really be frustrating when you're dealing with 5, 7 different subjects, and it's hard to remember, okay, what format does this have to be in. One of the pet peeves I've had is test questions that are literally written poorly on purpose. To give you an example, my daughter was studying science, and the question defined lightning, and then it had 2 answers. And the first answer was lighting, and the second answer was lightning. Now, I'm an auditory learner. My daughter is an auditory learner, and so when we look at a word, we're not noticing a 1-letter difference in a word. And so she marked lighting because, anyway, it was just totally ridiculous. She knew the answer to the question, and to trip her up just because of a 1-letter difference, that's just lame. That is so lame. And not only that, but there are questions that are written where the logic just doesn't quite follow. And the teachers are like, oh, well, we're going to teach them how to address tricky test questions. Well, exactly what does it accomplish writing tricky test questions? Aren't there better ways of teaching a child to be analytical and critical? So yes, pet peeve for me, poorly written test questions. And the last thing I think would be that it's not really independent study. So if you're thinking that you can come in and just have your child blow through an entire year of school in like 4 to 6 months and be done with it, chances are you're going to be reined in a little bit. Given the fact that there are live lessons going over material, it's hard to know whether or not you're going to need the live lesson to take that test and do well on it. So theoretically, a student could work ahead and not worry about watching any of the live lessons, even though they are going to have part of their grade count on taking those live lessons, so that kind of reins them in as far as how far ahead they can work. The teachers don't necessarily encourage it. It's just not that flexible. It is really flexible compared to a brick and mortar school, but it's not that flexible. If you have a different experience, absolutely post it in the comments below. My experience is that maybe 1 to 2 weeks. Little explanation, I had 2 students in online school. It was extremely stressful. They were both a bit younger. They both required help. And I also had a 4-year-old at home. But having 1 student in an online school is actually not that bad. She's old enough and she's disciplined enough that it's been a fairly good experience. But in the end, I would say that she was actually doing better at a brick and mortar school as far as her grades. As she's young, she's still figuring out how to be self-taught, but as an auditory learner, she's going to do better hearing a lecture with pretty much every single subject, and it's always going to be easier having someone stand up who knows the material and is able to explain things, and you're able to ask a live question when you have it rather than going over the material thinking, oh, I understand it well enough, and then finding out after the fact that you actually didn't understand it well enough. I would say it is worth giving it a try. It might be a good fit for you, it might not. These are the pros and cons, and hopefully it will help you make a decision for your family and your student. Thanks for watching.